Welcome to Discipline Strategies for Christian Parents, Part 2, where we will round out various discipline strategies that can be used for our children. We're going to be talking about preventive teaching, the loss of the item, natural and logical consequences, loss of privilege, and developing responsibility. Let's ask the Lord's blessing on our presentation. Lord, thank you so much that we can talk about these various strategies that we can use with our children in order to help them to grow. We want them to be fully functioning, mature adults when they hit adulthood. We want them to have emotional competencies and control. We want them to be able to manage various social situations and read the social cues that are around them. We want them to be intact as people with a good self-esteem and connected in nurturing relationships. We want them to have good self-talk and ways of relating to themselves so that they have a healthy view of themselves and not an overinflated view. Lord, help us as we look at disciplining our children, that is, helping them to grow to maturity in such a way that our discipline strategies honor you, they honor our children who are created in your image, and they allow for us to have more guilt-free parenting experiences than we would otherwise think possible. In Jesus' name, amen. The very first parenting strategy that I want to talk to you about is preventive teaching. And preventive teaching is the replacement to the more powerful methods of discipline like spanking or room restriction or grounding or something like that. And you can see that there are 8 steps in preventive teaching. These are also in your class notes. And preventive teaching takes the long road to accomplishing something, but is highly relational and is coaching in its orientation. Now, one of the reasons that parents might not use preventive teaching is that they need something right now in order to get compliance with their child. There's a bad attitude, there's this power play that's going on, and so parents might use spanking to simply say, you cannot act that way, you cannot talk that way, you cannot respond that way, and I need to get your attention. Sometimes parents will send their children to their rooms and say, you cannot act that way, you cannot talk that way, I need to get your attention. Sometimes they will put them in timeout for the very same reasons. But nonetheless, when we're talking about debriefing, we're talking about training our children through regular concepts of discipline, which is this idea that every interaction that I have with my children can have learning associated with it. And discipline is all about learning. It's not just about getting in trouble and having something happen to you. So notice this, the explanation of what is needed has to be given to children. Children don't know what's needed, and so you have to tell them very specifically what, what you want them to look like when they're dressed right, how you want them to interact with people, what words to use, how to stand in the right way so that their standing in a particular way doesn't evoke negative emotions out of other people, the tone that you want people to have, children to have when they're talking, the way you want them to clean up a room, the way you want them to handle a controller, the way that you want them to come and sit at the table. They need to know exactly what is going on. This is what coaching is all about. Then you need to tell them why it has to be that way, and then tell them why they need to make the changes in their lives because they keep moving forward. I like to say to people, hey, because you're 4 years old and you're going to be 5 soon, I want to tell you how 5-year-olds can handle this. Or, wow, now that you're 8, there's some really cool things about being 8 that I want to tell you about and I want to show you about because there's some things that you're going to do at 8 that are different than what you're going to do at 7. Now that you are in puberty, there are some big things that are going to happen in your life. And I want to share with you some things that I learned about puberty and some things that other parents have learned about puberty and things that other boys your age or girls your age have learned about puberty. And I want to help you to grow through that. You want, under number 4, to request that they are getting it, that they can say it in their own words, that they can practice it, and that you want to give them feedback on, yep, that's exactly what it is. Now, remember, they're going to fail a lot more before they get it right. So you want to plan at least 6 weeks of good practice before you really think that they should have something down, because it's really hard to keep brand new concepts that are unfamiliar to us in our mind and do them perfectly right away or do them repetitively throughout the week without any kinds of problems. So even though you have to wait, you have to give reminders and a lot of coaching and say, hey, remember, we're going to go to the table. Remember how you're going to sit. Hey, we're going to go to church. Remember the clothes that you're going to wear. Hey, remember, you got to take off your school clothes and you're going to put on your outside play clothes before you go outside so that you don't get grass stains on your pants or whatever it might happen to be that you want them to do. Give positive consequences and praise. Praise is just simply acknowledging that they did it well, and you want to say it something like this: man, I bet you feel pretty good right now because you did this really well. Don't say, Daddy's really proud of you, because all a child has to do to make Daddy mad is to misbehave. And what you want to do is to say, wow, you must feel pretty pleased with yourself. And I just want you to know that I'm really happy with you. And I'm glad that you feel good that you got this right. And I hope that you keep doing that. Well done. And then you set your sights for your child on the future. Hey, we're going to add to this in a little bit. Or I just want you to know that wherever you go, this is the sandbox behavior you have to have. Wherever you go, this is how I want you to ride your bike. Tomorrow, I want you to know that I want you to do the same thing. Now that you know what this is, I want you to be able to do this from now on. So notice that preventive teaching is necessary. Parents are coaches and mentors during this time. And a coach is somebody who works with an athlete or a person who needs to have step-by-step, very specific instructions. And that's what I have described for you in this preventive teaching illustration. But a mentor is somebody who works with an individual who already knows these different component parts, but needs some assurance and some conversation about how to put it together. And parents are both of those. So remember this statement at the bottom of this slide: practice makes permanent, not perfect. So we often hear that practice makes perfect, but if you learn it incorrectly, then it permanently is learned incorrectly. And so what you want to do is know that when somebody learns something and they practice it over and over again, but they don't get it right, they have to unlearn it. And that takes a great deal of skill and effort and focus. And sometimes people think that it's just too hard and I don't want to do it and it doesn't feel like me. And so I'm just going to do whatever comes naturally, even if it's not right or good or appropriate or holy or biblical. People are just going to do it because it's easy. And then they end up later on wishing that they would have made changes, or at least thinking that, that really wasn't as good as what I thought that it was. And preventive teaching helps us to avoid those kinds of mistakes in the future. Talk about the loss of the item. The goal of the loss of the item is to address the child's threshold of obedience and motivate personal growth by their loss of this, their sense of loss, their frustration about losing it, but also their anticipation of having the item again. And hopefully they can control it in a more appropriate way. So all you're going to do is have them check in their phone if they're misusing their phone. If they're on it in the middle of the night and they don't need to be, they need to check in their phone and they can get it the next day. If they're mismanaging video gaming equipment, they have to check in that video game or put it up. If they're not able to handle all of their toys the right way, or throwing toys, or are making their room a great big huge mess, they lose the items that are just strewn about the floor if they don't want to pick them up. So these items are removed for a period of time. And remember that after your child gets it back, it can be removed again, which is the beauty of, hey, for the rest of the morning, you can't use this and you can have it for the afternoon. Remember, the goal is to help them to become more mature, not make them feel so bad and rotten and horrible and shameful because they couldn't manage something the right way. You want to make sure that they learn something. So giving them the item back to see if they've learned how to manage it is great. You can always take it away for longer the next time. So you want to be kind. If the child chooses to lose the item based on safety, impulsivity, or behavior, you want to recognize that a child could be really frustrated with that. And what you're trying to do is create an awareness so that there can be self-control and eventually Holy Spirit control also in the life of your child, so that your child stops and recognizes better behavior before misbehaving about that item. Number 3, never remove everything or strip a child of possessions. Some personal items should never be taken, and you need to decide in advance what these are. There is a baseline. There are certain privileges that you have given to your sons and your daughters and your family that you don't ever want them to feel like they're not your children or that you don't care about them. And even if you get really, really upset at them, you must make sure to treat them with honor and respect, because that's what God does with us, is that he just doesn't dispense with us and take away our houses and our cars, or cause something really horrible to happen to us just because he's being vindictive. What you want to do is recognize that there are certain possessions that are so meaningful to your children that if you take them away, it'll create anger, fear, and anxiety that is actually counterproductive to discipline. There are natural and logical consequences. And natural consequences are those that you just let children experience on their own. But there are two really important statements about natural consequences is never compromise safety and never compromise righteousness. Never, 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 never let your children be in an unsafe position around fire or aerosols or vehicles or playing in the street just to teach them a lesson. And never compromise on righteousness. Don't ever compromise your morals or your ethics just because your child is fussing and carrying on and calling you a horrible parent or saying that he or she hates you. Is that you have to stand for what is right and good because you know that if you don't, your child's going to be harmed. And so never, never compromise on safety and never compromise on righteousness, especially if you are using natural consequences. Logical consequences are the big element that you want to grow into in your ability as a parent, because a logical consequence means that you're going to have a consequence that is tied to whatever your misbehavior is. So if you are um, misusing the TV remote control, you lose the opportunity to have the remote control. And so if you want the television channel changed, if you're sitting there, you have to ask somebody else to do it. You just can't flip through the channels and irritate everybody and change the volume and do whatever you want to do. If you've left your clothes out in the common area and you've been asked 3 times, hey, you need to pick up these clothes, and you don't do it, and mom or dad comes by, picks up those clothes, puts them in a bag for 2 or 3 days, you just don't get to have those clothes. And hopefully you're not going to need those clothes for 2 or 3 days as a kid. If you're the kind of a person who's arguing and fussing and carrying on, we always would have a rule in our family that you could not take a fight outside of our house. So if you're arguing with your siblings or you're arguing with us and you're supposed to go to somebody else's house, you cannot argue with us and treat us really poorly and then go over to your friend's house and play. You have to treat us well and demonstrate that you're in control of yourself emotionally and have a peaceable attitude to us before you can go over to your friend's house or before your friends can come over to our house. Those are logical consequences. They make a lot of sense. You leave your toys out. If you leave them out in the rain and they get rusty, that's a natural consequence. If you leave your toys out and mom and dad pick them up and they say, I'm sorry, but we told you to go pick up your toys and you chose not to, you don't get to have them for 2 days, that is a logical consequence. What you want to do is be a master at logical consequences, and this is where you need to have wisdom, because for most of us this is really difficult. When you're managing your children's behaviors and helping them to grow, what you want is to have them see, oh, when I act this way with this particular item or these people, I could have this consequence if I don't do it the right way. So I won't misbehave. I won't use this inappropriately because I want to keep this in my possession. I want to keep control of it. And so these logical consequences become really, really important. Loss of privilege is perhaps the biggest, like the big gun of 6 year olds and older, because privilege means that you're behaving in such a way that I can trust you and I can give you control over this time. I can give you control over going to your friend's house and coming home. I can give you control by giving you the car keys. I can give you and driving the car. I can give you control by being home by yourself. I can give you control because you're using the phone correctly. So I put up here, while spanking is a method that has the greatest emotional impact on a young child, the loss of privilege becomes a method that has the greatest impact on children age 6 and older, especially teenagers. So all behavior has consequences, and privileges are positive consequences of behavior. So Vanna and I, my wife and I, decided that we would discipline our children by giving them privileges and showing them how to maintain them, so that when our children had a certain level of maturity, they would have a certain level of responsibility. They would have a certain level of privilege. They'd have a certain level of choice, a certain level of control. So they could decide when to go to bed. They could decide when to get up, as long as they could go to bed at a decent hour and they would be ready to leave the house for school in the morning, having eaten breakfast. They could pick their own clothes because their clothes were appropriate for the occasion. They could invite their friends over between certain hours because everybody, including their friends, managed themselves well in our household. So they had all of these privileges that we would just give to them as our statement that you have maturity, and as a result of that maturity, you're able to really grow and develop into a responsible person. I remember talking to our daughter after she graduated from high school, and I said to her, "Why is it that you didn't really rebel when you were, in high school?" And she said, "Well, you never made us do anything that you would not do. So if we couldn't go to a certain movie because I wasn't a big fan of going to R-rated movies that just had gratuitous sex and violence in it, I needed to go to an R-rated movie that made sense, that didn't have that. She said, you didn't go and watch a bunch of movies and then didn't let us do that. You lived by the same standard." And we also let them become as mature as they possibly could be so that at 18, when they left home and went to college, they would be able to manage themselves pretty well. So you can see on this loss of privilege picture on the left that you remove a privilege if the behavior is inappropriate. So they lose that particular privilege. Lots of different privileges can be removed, but a lot of privileges can be given. And you want to be consistent and follow through. You want to mean what you say and say what you mean. Talk in these last few minutes about developing responsible children. Responsibility starts with the individual that you're working with. So responsibility develops over time. It needs coaching and mentoring. Needs a lot of patience with parents, and responsibility has developmental components. Let's take a look at these. This is on page 144 and 145 of your class notes. At age 2, the big focus that you want to have is on obedience, which is the foundation of all responsible behavior. So what you're looking at now is that a child who is obedient is one that internalizes what mom and dad have said. And as a result, there is this pliability, this compliance that's going on where children are going to trust mom and dad, and they're going to do what they say because children lack experience and they lack knowledge. And mom and dad, or whoever the caregiver is, has both more experience and more knowledge. And we're not perfect, but we have more than a 2-year-old. And so we're going to say and do interactions with our children in such a way that they're going to be drawn to us, we hope, and they will begin to reflect our values and reflect what is important for them to have as a 2-year-old. So at age 2, if they will have this compliance with us, they have that first level of responsible behavior. So when a child pitches a big fit and refuses to work with us, that's a serious kind of event in the life of a 2, 3, 4-year-old, because that just simply means I'm not going to do it and I'm going to do my own thing. At age 4 and 5, you begin to focus on morality. And this morality is kind of a technical word in this literature, and it just simply means that there's a cause and effect, that when I do something, there's going to be a behavioral response, either positive or negative, to what I'm doing. So I'm going to teach our children that when you punch somebody in the face, you don't get a positive response. But when you help somebody else out and you're kind or you deliver something for them, that there's going to be a real positive experience that happens. And so I want my children to understand that their behavior elicits a response. At age 6 and 7, you begin to focus on self-discipline. That is, I, as a 6-year-old, can put on my own clothes. I can make my own bed. I can clean my own room. I can take care of myself in the bathroom for the most part. I can take a shower. I can begin doing certain kinds of big boy, big girl activities, and I feel good about myself. And I want to foster this sense of self discipline. That is, that a child is able to live within the parameters that we have established as a family. At age 11 and 12 is the focus on service or altruism. I'm just going to be nice and do nice things because that's the right thing to do. So going on a missions trip from ages 11 and 12 on up is really important. Allowing for children to serve and help other people, to volunteer at uh, certain programs and 501c3 organizations through a church or through some kind of a neighborhood program is going to be really, really important, because it allows for them to get outside of themselves. So you have obedience, you have morality, you have self-control, and you have service. And you'll notice that if you have ever taken any child development, that there's some Piagetian thought in here. And so you have at ages 2 and 4 this pre-operations, this pre-logical thinking, that children are beginning to put these pieces together in a very early way. But age 6 is the beginning of concrete operations where children want to know how the world works. And so this idea of self-control means that if I obey my parents and if I know that my behavior impacts other people, and then I go out into the world and I have this level of control, then some really great things can happen to me. And ages 11 and 12 correspond to formal operations, which is the transition from children into youngest adults, or into this adolescent formal thinking that's going on, where people can see, oh, I can step up and I can help you, and that could be a really positive thing. And one of the things that I want you to think about is if you have a teenager who is not responsible, you can go through these steps backwards. And so you've got a teenager who doesn't serve, who's self-serving. You have a teenager who doesn't care what his responses are to everybody else, and doesn't have self-discipline. Sorry, that's the next one. And as a result of that, just has a messy room, doesn't turn in anything, is not very responsible, doesn't really care what people think about him, doesn't really care how his behavior affects anybody else, takes them all the way back to obedience. Says, I am unwilling to be a person in this culture that complies with the basic social mores norms that really needs to take place. And this is why a lot of parents end up having a lot of conflict with their teenagers, is because they have to go back to rules. And that very first rule is you have to do it this way. And if you've got a child that has not learned this and gets put back on that level, that is a way that offends them because they think that they're way too sophisticated. They have to follow mom and dad's rules in order to be a member of the family or household, or the school rules or society rules. I'm exempt from those. And that goes all the way back to this sense that I don't want to be obedient to anybody. So what you're looking at now in this development of responsibility are these four main areas that you want to make sure that you build into the life of your children. So that's it for the time that we have for this very brief overview of these disciplinary methods. And the whole idea is that parents will have a variety of methods to choose from. And as a result, we'll always have options on what they can do so that they don't ever get stuck. And a lot of our job is to help parents be creative, to take these various methods and to say, how can I use them throughout my week, so I have a variety of ways that I can help my children to grow and develop and move them forward. So remember, as we conclude this section, that you focus in on the positive, that you want children to have a good model about how you want them to behave. You want to focus them in on what you want them to do more than what you don't want them to do. And that as a result of their own level of ability and understanding and maturity, you're going to use some of these disciplinary strategies in as kind of a way as possible, in a way that reflects your faith in God, as a loving, caring God, to motivate and influence your children forward in really good ways.